Good evening. I'm Phil Santonzi, Program Chair for ASQ Section 1510 here in Southeast Florida. It is July 9th, 2024. Anyone may join our LinkedIn group. ASQ Southeast Florida Section 1510 is the name of the group. And you can, sign in and stay updated on events and activities within the section. Our section chair, Kara Bryan, couldn't make it tonight, but she does have two announcements that she wanted me to relay. One of them is that we are, for Section 1510, we're looking for interest, anybody who would like to be a board member in 2025. So if you do have any interest in working as a board member, you can just contact us and you can ask, and we'll, ask questions. We'll talk with you to give you information about it before you decide. But if you have any interest at all, please contact us before September 30th. The second message, Norbert, if you would like to talk about this one, about the student scholarship, go ahead, Norbert.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. So for those of you who are in my breakout groups, I mentioned that I am the scholarship chair for Southeast Florida 1510. Every year we have a scholarship program that operates for students. Before COVID, it was all Southeast Florida. Now it's really just about any student at undergrad or postgrad level. It can even be high school seniors heading into college. We've got two awards, it's $2,000 each. The award closes on July 20th every year. So we've been making this plug about the scholarship every month for the last how many months, I don't know, but still, we're just giving everyone the last opportunity. So if you have any youngsters in the family, college freshmen, or college students, high school seniors, friends, family, people you work with, their kids, just let them know. Go on to our LinkedIn website or LinkedIn site. There's a link there that will take them to the application form that provides all the information that is required to be submitted for the scholarship program. And it's all electronic. They just need to finish everything off and just send it across in an email. That's about it. Any questions that anybody can have, you can always reach out to us, and we'll be glad to help you. But we believe that the application is very, very detailed in what's required. So any applicant can get all the information they need there. Thank you.
Thanks, Norbert. Well, let's go ahead and move on to our featured presentation for tonight. Our speaker is Mark Thompson, who is partner at Decision Processes International in Lakewood Ranch, Florida. Mark has been a consultant for over 20 years, specializing in strategy, mental toughness, and change management, helping companies increase performance. Tonight, he's going to talk about the power of mental toughness. He has a doctorate in organizational development and leadership. Mark has conducted hundreds of sessions for Fortune 1000 companies, as well as middle market and small businesses. During this time, he has discovered the secrets that allow companies to seek a higher level of consciousness and achieve 10-level results. Please join me in welcoming Mark. Thanks. Welcome, Mark. Glad to have you.
Great, thanks. Good evening. Glad to be here. And by the way, Phil said, can you ask any questions? There's no questions you can ask. No. Think of this more as a discussion. By the way, if you have a question, by all means, raise your hand or just shout it out or whatever, and we'll talk about it. But one of the things that we should start with is just to understand the definition of mental toughness. So the working definition, mental toughness means taking control of your thoughts, feelings, and attitudes, especially under pressure. Whenever I speak to a group about mental toughness, I always have this greatest fear that they're either going to be reluctant or have some reticence or even a little bit of fear of asking what I call the what if question. So if I can take you back to your grade school work when you learned about Christopher Columbus, when he was trying to sail the ocean blue and find the trade routes to the New World, he was struggling because he was trying to raise money. And of course, at the time, the point of view of the world was, well, the world's flat, and if you sail far enough, you're going to fall off the edge of the earth. So you can imagine that people weren't always that enthusiastic about giving him money. And so he was struggling in doing that. Somehow, he is able to wrangle a meeting with the Queen Isabel of Spain, and he's going in and he makes his presentation to the Queen. But as he's making the presentation to the Queen, he notices that she's a very very straight face, no expressions on her face as he's making this presentation, which he thinks, of course, is a fabulous idea. And he gets to the end of the presentation. She says, Your Majesty, I really just have one closing question for you. And that is, in terms of finding the trade routes to the New World, what if I was right? What if I'm right? And if I was right, that would mean you would not only secure your legacy as one of the greatest monarchs of all time, and you would bring enormous wealth to the country of Spain that would last for decades, maybe centuries. And he paused, and all of a sudden she got this big smile on her face, and she said, and well, you know what she said, I'll give you the money. And so, of course, long story short, he got the money, found the trade routes, and Spain became an incredible, powerful country for many, many years after that, because he asked her the what if question. And that's a question that I think that we need to think about in terms of how we can grow ourselves and we can grow our business. You know, there's a Russian author by the name of Ayn Rand, who wrote a book called Fountainhead, and also a book called Atlas Shrugged. And in that book, in the book of Fountainhead, she talked about being able to live a life of unrestricted existence, which means you could do what you want, with who you want, wherever you want, whenever you want. And the point is, it's all out there if we just are willing to take and ask the what if question and go out and go after it. So if you think, I looked across the people whose videos were on here, and it looks like maybe the average age here is somewhere in the 40s. Is that a fair, maybe that's high, I don't know. But let's just say that number is somewhere in the 40s. And if you go back maybe 15 years, 10 years, go back, and you think about in the last 10 years, all of the young 20 and 30 something billionaires that have come into this country, in the world, that have been able to make billions and billions of dollars. But if you were to go back and take yourself back 20 some years when you were 20, you didn't even think in terms of billions. That was probably a number that didn't even enter your consciousness that people would be billionaires. And now, and I just Googled this, by the way, before this presentation, there are now 6 companies in the world that have market caps of excess of $1 trillion. And so the point is, it's all out there, but you got to ask for it, and you got to have the mental toughness to be able to do that. But here's the rub. And if you think back to the time when John Kennedy was running for president, the United States had come out of a couple of wars, World War II, and of course the Korean conflict, and he sensed that there was a malaise in the country. And he needed a catalyst as to how he could get everybody excited again to grow this country, because as well as we were doing, we weren't doing as well as we could have. And so he gets a hold of Dr. Warner Van Braun, who was a rocket scientist, and he invites him to come to his place. And he takes the good doctor for a walk in the park, walk in the garden. This, by the way, was before Steve Jobs made walking in the garden a cool thing. So they go for a walk in the garden, and he asks the good doctor one question. He says, "Can we put a man on the moon?" And the good doctor says, "You can absolutely put a man on the moon if, in fact, you have the will to do it." And of course, we know all what happened. Kennedy gives his famous inaugural speech, and he says, "We're going to go to the moon. It's by such and such a date, and we're going to do it not because it's easy, but because it's hard." Now, at that time, you today have more computer power in your iPhone than they had in all the computers that they were using to figure out how they're going to put a man on the moon. And yet they did it 5.5 months ahead of schedule and a considerable amount of money below budget. So the opportunities are there for us if we have the will and if we have the desire to go out and to do it. So where do we start? Well, let me say this to you. I have some good news for you, and maybe even a little bit of a secret. And that's the following. If you were to walk up to a man or a woman on the street and ask them if they'd like to be if they would like to be mentally tough, virtually everybody's going to say, "Yeah, I'd like to be mentally tough." And then if you ask them the second question, well, are you mentally tough? Well, now that there's some variability in those answers. Well, I'm not really sure if I'm mentally tough or whatever. Well, let me tell you, here's a little secret. We're all mentally tough. Every one of us here tonight is mentally tough. And let me prove it to you with a short story. Let's say you were driving home one night after work, normal day, nothing really out of the ordinary, and you're kind of tossing around in your head the things that happened that day, and you're you're wondering about what you to do tomorrow, et cetera, et cetera. And as you're getting closer to your house, you see some smoke in the air. And you don't think too much of it. You think, man, maybe somebody's burning some leaves or who knows what. You don't think too much of it. And as you get closer to your house, you realize the smoke's getting a little thicker. And now you finally turn down your street and the smoke is really thick. And you realize that the house that's on fire is yours. So you press on the gas, you race up to the barricades. There's all the fire trucks. Hoses are spread out all over the street. The fire chief is standing there, and the house is becoming more and more engulfed in flames. You jump out of your car, you run up to the fire chief, and you say, "Did you get my kids out? Did you get my kids out?" And the fire chief says, "Listen, mister," he says, "I don't know anything about any kids, but you can see this house is becoming more and more engulfed in flames. I can't send my men in there. It would be a suicide mission." So now this guy, he's got to make a split-second decision. Does he sit down on the curb like the fire chief told him to do and calm down? Or does he jump over the barricades and run into the house and try to save his kids, knowing full well that the probability is high that that he could lose his life, but he knows that he would never forget of himself if he didn't at least try. So the question I have for you, how many of you would sit on the curb? Most people's answers, in fact, I think almost everyone's answers are, of course, they're not going to sit on the curb. They're going to go in there and they're going to try to save their kids. That right there is an example of mental toughness, the mental toughness that is inside us. But we need a reason. We need a reason as to what we're going to be mentally tough about. And a lot of people go through life and, they don't have a reason. They don't have a reason as to why they should be more mentally tough. So the Navy SEALs have this thing called the 3 G's of the mission: get in, get it done, and get out before somebody dies. And that's the essence of a mission who's someone who is mentally tough. So we all know Albert Einstein, and Albert Einstein has a famous quote: "A problem cannot be solved at the same level of consciousness in which it occurs." So you have to raise your level of consciousness in order to solve a more difficult problem. So if you want to determine where your level of mental toughness is, you first have to figure out where you're at today. So if you think of the metaphor, if someone's going to go on a diet and they want to lose some weight, either the doctor told them to, maybe their spouse told them to, maybe they just wanted to. They wanted to lose some weight. What's the very first thing that somebody does if they're going to go on a diet to lose weight? What's the very first thing? Well, most people would say, I got to get on a scale. I got to find out what I weigh today so I know how much I should lose or how I should approach this whole idea. Am I trying to lose 10 pounds, 100 pounds? How am I going to go about this? So what we help people do is we help them figure out what their level of consciousness as it relates to mental toughness. And the way that we do this is we use socioeconomic terms. And I'd like you to kind of process in your mind as I explain these to you, kind of where you're at in these terms. So the first level of consciousness, of which, by the way, there's 5 levels. The first level of consciousness is what we call the poverty class. And that's about 5% of the population. And each one of these has a mantra, by the way. And the poverty class, their mantra is, you live, you die, life sucks. And we won't spend a lot of time. We won't spend a lot of time on that one. But the next one is what we call working class consciousness. And this is about 10% of the population. And these people, they just want to survive. They come to work, they punch the clock, they put in their time, they punch the clock to leave, they go home, they sit on the couch and wait for it to be morning. And if these people ever interview for a job, the big questions that they have of if someone's going to hire them is, what's the wage? What time's lunch? How many breaks do we get? How many weeks of vacation are there? They're just trying to survive. The next level is what we call middle class consciousness. Now, Here's the thing about middle-class consciousness. It's 70% of the population. And the middle-class consciousness level is the most dangerous level that anybody can be at. And the reason why it's the most dangerous level is because the people that are of middle-class consciousness, which again, 70% of the population, these people are they are deluding themselves. They're in delusion. They think they're smarter than they are. They think they're better than they are. They think they work harder than they do. They have this high view of themselves, but it's not. When you really look at the facts, it's not the case. These are also the people who probably buy a bigger house than they can afford. They lease their cars rather than own their cars because they can't really afford to buy it. And they don't lease a small, inexpensive car, compact car. They lease like a BMW sedan or an Escalade or an Audi 8 sedan. They lease an expensive car and they drive around town and they basically kind of reiterate to themselves how successful they are. But they're really in delusion. The next level is what we call the upper class level of consciousness. This is about 10% of the population. Now, this group here is very successful. They make a lot of money, but they live in kind of an ego-driven world, and also they live in a bit of fear consciousness. They keep working harder and harder. It's never enough because they're always afraid that maybe they're going to lose it. So they work very, very hard to continue to be on the gerbil wheel. If this is someone that is in your sphere or in your world, this is the kind of person you want to be careful of, because this person will step on anybody in order to get to the top. The last one, the fifth one, is what we call world-class consciousness. And this is about 5% of the population. This is, I think, what I would like to think, and I try to aspire to. These people here that have a world-class consciousness, they are spirit-driven. Not necessarily religious, although if you are of that mindset, that's absolutely fine. But these people are driven really by what's in their heart. And someone on one of the, when we were having our Q&A here as a group a little while ago, someone in the group mentioned servant leadership. This is where servant leadership resides, at this level right here. Doing it for the team. It's all about the team. You know, I love to read books. I read a lot of books. And I just recently am rereading a book called Built to Last, written by Jim Collins. He also wrote Good to Great, which is an excellent book. I highly encourage you to read it. But in this Built to Last, as I'm starting to reread it, I'm about 4 chapters in. In the first 3 chapters, he talks about the visionary companies, the Walmarts, the Mercks, the 3Ms, Motorola, talking about the visionary companies. And what they cared about more than anything was the vision of the business. And they put the vision, the vision and the people in front of the profits. They believed that if they did the right thing, that the profit was going to come. It reminds me of another story that some of you may remember, is when the United States went up against the Russians in 1980 at Lake Placid in the Olympics. And they went up against this Russian team, which of course was much more successful, stronger, had won gold medals before, and ultimately they had these young 19-year-old kids, and they won. They won. And so Mike Razioni, who was a captain, he was being interviewed after the game. And the commentator said, can you tell me, Mike, how is it possible that you could have won this game? I mean, you're playing a stronger team, a more experienced team, and you have these young kids. He says, how was it that you were able to win? And Razioni thinks about it for a minute. He says, I don't know. It was a miracle. And he says, well, yeah, I guess in some ways maybe it was a miracle, but what else? Tell me more. And he's digging in a little bit more to try to find out more about what it was all about. And finally he says, these boys, these kids, they loved each other. They loved each other, and they weren't selfish, and they played their hearts out, but they played for the team. And I believe that this is the place where world-class consciousness works. And one of one of our study questions this afternoon or this evening was how do you encourage success in an organization? How do you encourage leadership in an organization? And I think it starts with leadership, but I also think it starts with the mindset of having world-class consciousness. And if you can have world-class consciousness, I believe that you can achieve much greater results. And we all know it's all out there. We see it being done every day. You see these 20 and 30 something billionaires starting companies and growing companies. It's there for the taking, but you have to have the will to do it. And of course, it helps to be mentally tough. So part of all this is it requires a certain level of thinking. We think there's three different types of thinking. There's negative thinking, positive thinking, and of course, critical thinking. So negative thinking is infused with emotion. Unfortunately, negative thinking, being overly negative in your thinking, which there's a need for some of that, okay? But being overly negative in your thinking holds you back from success. Positive thinking is also infused with emotion, but you got to be careful about positive thinking. I mean, let's just say, for example, that you decided you were one of the greatest positive thinkers of all time, and you decided that you're in some major city. It doesn't matter whether it's Chicago or Dallas or New York or San Francisco. You're in some major city, and you decide that on a nice summer night, on a nice warm summer evening, on Saturday night at 3 o'clock in the morning, that you're going to go down and walk around the most dangerous area of that city where they have all kinds of crime and murders and et cetera, et cetera. Now, you could be the most positive thinker in the world, but if you walk into that area, there's a reasonable good chance that you're going to have some problems. You're going to get hurt in some way, and things that maybe get killed for all that, I know, but something else could happen to you, and you could be in a lot of trouble. Critical thinking, on the other hand, says it's not about the emotion. It's just about the facts. And I don't know how many of you remember the old television show with Jack Webb and Dragnet. He was the police detective, and he was very deadpan, very straight-faced, and he'd be interviewing the witnesses. And now this is in the 50s, and so his favorite phrase always was, he'd have his little pad out, his pencil, and he'd be taking notes. He'd say, and the woman would go on about all the things that, it was involved in the crime. And he'd say, just the facts, ma'am, just the facts. And that's what critical thinking is about. Critical thinking is about just getting after the facts and not allowing positive or negative thinking to infuse with emotion what you're trying to understand. So we have a wonderful book that you can get on Amazon called 177 Tools of the World Class, Mental Toughness Tools of the World Class. And in that book, they have 177 tools. And the first one in the book talks about objective reality. And objective reality is a very interesting concept, because objective reality has basically two faces, or two edges of the sword, if you will. One edge is what we call facts, and the other edge is what we call truths. And facts are just facts. We're here on, I think it's, what is this, July 9th in the evening on Zoom. Fact. Can't really dispute that. Perceptions or truths are perceptions of those facts. So if you think about yourself coming into a meeting where you're trying to solve a serious problem with your business, and many times what happens is people come in and they're infused with emotion. They're very emotional. They're throwing out all these opinions. They're trying to come up with all these different ways. And the best way to address it is to just stop and say, okay, let's just get the facts out on the table here and determine what it is what's most important for us to do. So one of the things that we do is when we work with leadership teams and sales teams, we interview usually 3 to 5 executives. We develop an electronic survey that is 100% customized, and we ask the people questions about their business. One of the questions we always ask is the following. We say, based upon your results as a leader, would you consider yourself a good performer, a very good performer, or a great performer? And interestingly enough, when we ask this and we've done this with like 35,000 people, whenever we ask this people, 82% of the people, and it's always the same number. It just works out that way. 82% of the people say they are great performers or world-class performers. That's what they think of themselves in terms of their job. And then we go to leadership and we say to the leadership, would you consider your people that work for you, would you consider them a good performer, a very good performer, or a great performer? And we ask them, what percentage do you think of your people are great performers or world-class performers? So let me ask the audience here, if we can. I don't know if everybody can unmute or whatever. What percentage do you think leadership said that their people were world-class or great performers based upon their results? Can I have a couple of guesses?
5%. I'm gonna go with 45%.
45. Okay, that's a good guess.
I'll take 5%.
How many?
5%.
That's a good guess. We'll give one more. How about one more?
15%.
15%. Okay. So the answer actually is 7. So whoever said 5, well, you get the door prize.
Woohoo.
So but here's what's interesting. This is very important as it relates to mental toughness. If you subtract 7 from 82, which is 75, that means that your people, as they're going about their work every single day, 75% of them think they're world-class performers. Now, if you think that, and let's just take a sales example for lack of a better one. Let's just say that you're a sales professional, salesperson, man or woman, doesn't matter. You're a sales professional, and you believe that you're a world-class salesman, a world-class performer. And now you're going to go on a sales call. How much time would you spend preparing, reading, researching, planning your sales questions? How much time would you spend preparing if you already believed you were a world-class salesperson? And of course, it's a rhetorical question. Obviously, you wouldn't spend any time or very little time at all because, hey, I'm world-class. I mean, I don't need to prepare. I don't need to practice because I'm world-class. And I think this is an important part of kind of coming back to Phil's questions about how do we institute success in our through leadership in our companies. We've got to get people to understand where they are. It's not about beating them down or beating them up, but we've got to get people to understand the concepts around mental toughness to recognize that, hey, you may not be performing as well as you think that you're performing. And if you're not doing that, that's holding your company back and it's holding you back. But if you can come to grips with that, you can advance your company's business and you can advance your own personal business. So let's have a quiz. Here's a quiz. Now that you understand the difference between middle class and world class, let me just ask you some questions here. Identify these thoughts as either middle class or world class. It is almost impossible for me to get my daily activities done as a leader. Is that middle class thinking or world class thinking? Anybody can answer. Anybody got an answer? Middle class thinking, absolutely. Completing all my activities at work leaves me no work-life balance. Middle class thinking, world class thinking.
Middle class.
Middle class. A team wins together or not at all. Middle class thinking or world class thinking.
I'd say world.
I'd say world class thinking. Yeah, it's about the team. It's always about the team. I use critical thinking to analyze my performance. Is that something a middle class person would do or a world class person would do?
World class.
World class. All right, truth or fact? We have skill gaps in our applied technologies, true or false?
True.
True. In my role as a leader, am I good at controlling my emotions when making decisions?
You would like to think so.
Okay.
True. That's what I think.
I'm a big thinker. I'm a true visionary. True or false? The people in your organization, do you think they think big enough and bold enough as they'll go about looking at initiatives, looking at problems they need to solve? Do you think they are a big thinker, and do you think they're a true visionary or not?
Well,
No one will hear your answer at your company. Generally speaking, in your businesses, do you think people are big thinkers and visionaries, all your coworkers? Or is there room for improvement?
always room for improvement, no matter how great you are.
There's a deep customer. This is a good one. There is deep customer knowledge among our people. Do you think that your people, and I realize you're in all different roles in your businesses, do you think your people that you work with every day, your coworkers and your organization, do you think they have a deep insight into your customer?
I would say yes.
You would say yes. Okay. Any
I
other
have a,
answers?
I have a small team. We can't afford to be otherwise.
Good answer. Any other answers?
I would say yes as well.
You'd say what?
Yes, as well.
You'd say yes. Okay. I'll tell you the work that I do with companies, this issue, we call this voice. Everybody has got a different acronym for these things, but one of the things that these companies call this is voice of the customer. And I will tell you that I work with a lot of companies that do not have a deep antenna down into their customers to know what their real insights are. What they do have is their own belief as to what they think their customers need or want, but they don't have a deep antenna down into what the customer really does want. They don't.
Yeah.
They struggle with that. They really struggle with that.
That's
See
the
that as
problem I
well.
have with this question, because this question asks, there's a deep understanding, and you'd like to say yes, but in reality, it's probably no. And it's the false belief that you understand it is what's dangerous.
Mhm.
That's exactly right. All right, so these are just some concepts to share with you when it comes to mental toughness. So one of the concepts that we talk about here is the presidential problem solving technique, and these are tools that you can use in your business. So one of them it's called compartmentalization. It's one of the tools in our book, right? Compartmentalization. Important to place each problem in a box. Being able to compartmentalization is the hallmark of a great leader. Being able to take certain problems that are really difficult and recognize we can't spend all of our time on this one problem. We've got other things to do. And the reason why we call it the presidential problem solving technique is the president of the United States, the job of the president of the United States was probably the most difficult job there is in the world. He or she makes life or death decisions, or has to make life or death decisions every single day. They can't just be inundated with all these problems and just give them all the same level of attention, even though they are life and death situations. They've got to be able to compartmentalize their thinking, work on this problem for some period of time, get more information, and then go on to the next problem. You know, I don't know if any of you ever read anything or knew anything or read anything about when Ronald Reagan was president, but when he was president, he had been the governor of California, then he became the president. And one of his approaches to management was that he would tell people that they would needed to bring him a problem that he needed to make a decision upon, and it needed to be typed, double spaced on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper, and at the bottom of the page he had 3 boxes: yes, no, needs more information. And everybody was all up in arms, said, "Oh my gosh, you know, you were the governor of California, but this is the United States of America. These problems are too complex. We can't put this on an 8.5 by 11 sheet of paper." And his response to them, which I thought was good, when he says, "If you can't explain this problem to me on one page, then you don't understand the problem." And I thought that was a great demonstration of leadership, because a lot of people, they have so much data, but they can't dig through and find the essence of the problem. One of the other ones here was the SEAL strategy. It says 3 Gs requires massive practice. Capturing bin Laden, when they went to capture bin Laden, they They basically practiced 18 hours a day for 2 months. They built a replica of the compound, and they would run the mission. They debrief. They go out. They run it again. Come back. Run the mission. Debrief. Run it again. They did that for 18 hours a day for 2 months before they went into that mission. Obviously, very complicated mission, and it was not without its problems, but it was successful. And this kind of comes back to the thing about whatever it is that you're doing in your job, any complex job, how much time do you really spend preparing and practicing to try to get the right answer? I don't think I can pronounce this word. Yamamuchi. Do I have it right? Yamamuchi. Yamanouchi. They're a drug manufacturer, and they developed Visicare previously, and had previously launched Lipitor. I believe Visicare is a bladder control drug, but they developed the Visicare drug, but it was going to be 2 years away from its launch, and they created the organization, the whole sales force, all the administration, right down to the receptionist. They had everybody in place. And they had to keep them motivated for 2 years before they could launch, before the FDA was going to approve this. Now, if you know anything about pharmaceutical drugs, you know that they invest tens of millions of dollars, maybe hundreds of millions of dollars to develop the drug. They only have 7 years to sell as many of the drugs as they can at a good price. And then the generics come in. So once they launch that product, they have to go out and they have to be locked and loaded to sell as many of these things. So they actually, this was a project that we did a number of years ago. We came in there and we worked with the entire company, the entire group in this division of Visicare to give them the mental toughness tools in order that they could stay mentally tough and focused and alert for 2 years. So they'd have to go out to the doctors and tell them about this fabulous drug, the business development people, pharmaceutical sales, tell them how fabulous the drug was, but yet, but by the way, we can't deliver it for 2 years. Well, it takes a lot of mental toughness. Got to be very focused. Catalyst for mental toughness. Catalyst, the ultimate catalyst of change is where learning happens and grows. There's change going on in companies every single day, and that is a great place for you to think about how you can apply mental toughness, because it's difficult. People have a difficult time dealing with change. Another one here is preparation for the storm. Now, this is going to sound kind of crazy. It says, I cannot teach you mental toughness per se. I can only give you the tools. It's like strength training. If you came to me and said, hey, I want you to teach me strength, I can't teach you strength. I can take you to the gym. I can put you on a program. I can show you how to use all the tools, but I can't teach it to you. I can't teach you strength. I just have to show you how the process works. And that's why people use our process, is they learn all these tools and they're able to apply them in their day-to-day business. Sustainable resilience requires emotion, enthusiasm, like Jeff Bezos. I don't know if you're a fan of Jeff Bezos. I read a couple of his biographies. He says every day is day one. Day two is status. And day three, I think he says, is irrelevant. And day four, well, you're circling the drain. He believes that you have to be so focused that every day is day one and be totally engaged. And of course, obviously, he was very successful at that. Perspective. The middle class thinking will not take time to develop their vision. I had a chance this last six months or so, to work beside Phil as he talked about as we did examine these different companies for the Sterling Council. And probably the number one thing that came out with each one of these companies was that they had a lack of vision. They struggled to collaboratively determine what their vision was. Middle class people won't take the time to work on their vision. They're bounded by their own limiting perspective and their own limiting beliefs. You've heard that phrase before. Gratitude. Nonlinear thinking traps us into a higher level of nonlinear thinking can trap us into a higher level of consciousness. Nonlinear thinking taps into a higher level of consciousness. It heightens their creativity. Athletes call this the zone. Kobe Bryant became very great at this when he realized it was all about the team. And then the end game, Stephen Covey says, always start with the end in mind, visualizing what you want something to become. Last two here, personal development. Only 5% of the people study personal development, and yet everybody wants to be mentally tough. Everybody wants to be better, but people generally don't want to study it. Logic versus emotion. Coaches coach through logic or emotion. World class knows that logic is in the mix. Strategic planning, logic is essential. Emotion creates confusion, but to disregard the fire that burns inside you will eliminate you from raising your levels of consciousness. We just covered that one. Front sight focus. This is another one from the Navy SEALs. Always be looking ahead. When you're aiming a gun, you align the front and rear sights. Concentrate on the front sight, making it appear clear and sharp. Provides better control. Practice develops muscle memory and consistency. You always have to have your focus to the front. One of the other Navy SEALs comments is embrace the suck. SEALs use this term. So much of that what they do in the training and real life missions are more difficult, and they realize how difficult it is, but they're mentally tough, and they go into the mission and they just simply embrace the suck. Rigid versus flexible thinking, difficulty in adapting to change, perfectionism, unrealistic high standards, conflict in relationships, stress and anxiety. Let's see. I missed what that one is here. Lighten up, and the last one is lighten up and find humor, engage in relaxing activities. All of those together help you to become more mentally tough. A key point about this is about linear thinking and nonlinear thinking. Nonlinear thinking is A, B, C, D, E. Nonlinear thinking is A, D, B, E, C. Not being bold enough in business. People who have a linear solution make more money by working more hours. Middle class trade, they trade time for money. World class thinking is that they go after the non-obvious solution. My belief about this is don't fight the battle if you can't win. World class makes more money solving problems. First be a problem finder and then be a problem solver. 12 critical thinking strategies of the Navy SEALs. Always be on the offense. Bulletproof your mission. Know the purpose of the mission. Be front sight focused. Define your mission. Simplify the battlefields. Eliminate distractions. Select high value targets. Mentally rehearse the mission. Identify and embrace the pain of the mission. Control your level of arousal. Control your attention through self-talk and expand your awareness. You know, this issue about self-talk, someone asked me one time if there was one thing that I could do to improve my level of mental toughness, my focus. And if you go and you read the books about all the people that are high-level performers, basically the one thing they always tell you about is self-talk or affirmations. Saying affirmations as to what you want to accomplish every single day will keep you mentally tough and keep you focused on what you want to do. You can take each one of these 12 strategies and just think about them and think about how you run your life and how you run your business. Are you always on the offense? Do you always take the time to bulletproof your mission? These are all great tools to use when you think about what is it about your role in your business. All right, let me just give you another little quiz here. And then we have a little exercise for you this evening. Identify these thoughts as middle class or world class. I'm distracted by upcoming changes. Is that middle class thinking or world class thinking? What would you guess?
Middle class.
Yep. No matter what changes come from senior management, I'm responsible for my results. Middle class or world class?
World class.
World.
Yep. Sometimes in meetings, I'm afraid to be honest.
Middle.
Middle, yeah, I agree with middle. I have a crystal clear written vision for my business life.
World class.
Yep. That's going to be our little exercise tonight, by the way. All right, truth or fact, just a couple more here. I'm satisfied with the pace of growth in my company. Are you or are you not?
False.
Yeah, you're satisfied with the growth?
No.
You're not satisfied. I would think it would be probably not. Always an analysis of my team's performance is too black and white. Do you think we have a tendency to be too black and white in the way we analyze things in your companies? What do you think about that?
I think that's changing.
changing.
From too black and white to seeing other possibilities.
Excellent. Our processes are coordinated among departments. Do all your departments talk to each other enough?
False.
We have adequate capital for growth. Of course, it depends on the company. Some companies do, some companies don't. Do you think, based on what you know about your business, is there enough capital?
False.
False. You know, I did a project a while ago with a manufacturing company. It was a strategy project. It was $1 billion manufacturing company, and I was working with one of the divisions with about 100 million. And they asked me to come and speak to their distributor conference. And I went and spoke to them, and they had the CEO from the big company, from the mothership, and the CFO was there. And so I got to meet them, and the company that I was working with, they had a couple of projects actually that they wanted money for to do from the mothership. And so I'm talking with the CEO and the CFO, and I said, you know, my company here, my client, which is your company you own, said, you know, they could use some capital. They need some capital for a couple of projects. I said, what's the situation with that? They said, look, we have a lot of money. And they did. They had a lot of money. They're a very rich company. We have a lot of money. We tell people in every quarterly management meeting, we have an investment committee. If you have a project, just call up my secretary, get time on the agenda, and come in and present your project. And if it makes sense, if it makes good sense, we're going to give you the money. He says, you know what? Nobody ever comes. So the money is there, but people don't put together the story. They don't put together the proposal to go get the money. Middle class, here's another quiz, middle class, world class. Identify these thoughts as middle class or world class. The economy dictates my results. Middle class or world class?
Middle class.
Yeah, I agree. Being bold as a businessman is inappropriate. Middle, yeah. When I become a better performer, I will get better results. I am the problem and I am the solution. I am responsible for my results. Middle or world?
World.
Yep, I agree with that. Process, truth, or fact. Process is truth or fact. This is about objective reality. I'm a human being, true or false? Hopefully those are all true. I'm a good business person. True or false? Everybody's going to have a different answer, of course, but
Well, based on what you said before, most people would say true.
most people are what?
Based on what you said before, 82%, most people would say true.
Yeah, you know what? You're right. My business won't improve until the economy recovers. True or false? How many people after COVID, by the way, COVID was a terrible tragedy. You know, 1 million people died. I'm not making light of that in any way. But how many people after COVID were stuck? It was like their feet were in concrete. They couldn't move. I talked to many companies that were just paralyzed. And they just couldn't get out of their own way to figure out some way to grow their business or to change their business. You know, it's a great story about. Are there any Chipotle fans in this call tonight? You know, I know a little bit about Chipotle, and obviously they were impacted, you know, dramatically by COVID because no one would come into the stores and buy food, and so they're trying to figure out what was it that they could do. And they didn't want to close. They wanted to figure out what they could do. And at the time, they had an initiative in process and development where they were going to have an online ordering app. They didn't have it at the time. They were going to have an online ordering app, but it was in process. And when they got all their management team together, they sat down and they said, well, what are we going to do? COVID's coming to an end. COVID is still in process, but it's opening up a little bit. What are we going to do? And they made a decision to pour literally all their resources, just put everything else on hold, pour all their resources into developing that online ordering app, which they did very successfully. And they came out of the doldrums, if you will, after COVID, and their stock was like, I think their stock dropped down to $250 a share from wherever it was. I think it was at 500 or 600, dropped down to $250 a share. About 2 weeks ago, when I look, their stock was $3,500 a share. So they made a decision that although the economy and COVID, and it was as terrible as it was, but they made a decision as a management team that they were going to focus on what they could do to fix the problem. And they did, and incredibly successful. What shouldn't we have bought that stock? Wow. All right. So we have a little exercise for you tonight. Here's the definition of mental toughness. Here's the formula for mental toughness. Desire plus vision plus process must be greater than cost. So in other words, you could have the greatest desire, the greatest vision, and the greatest process in the world, but if it's greater cost than you can afford or that makes any sense, well, you're not going to do it. So you want to develop a vision, have the desire, have the will. Remember that from Kennedy's story, and you want to have a vision, and then you want to have the right process. And we're going to give you a little process here.
Yeah.
So why don't we just spend a little bit of time here and start this, and then you will have that as a takeaway, and then you can go back. This is something that if you're interested, if you want to do this, this is something that really requires probably a glass of wine and a quiet place. But let's just start here. Now, you don't have access to be able to, so you maybe just have to write down the abbreviate or write down the title and then answer the question. So the first one says, list 5 things. And trust me, this process works. List 5 things you're currently dissatisfied with in your professional life. Obviously, this is all going to be confidential because you're all individuals. So jot down, and I'm not going to ask anybody to tell us what they wrote unless they wanted to. I'm not going to put anybody in the spot. But what are 5 things today that you would say you're dissatisfied with in your professional life? And we'll just give you a couple of minutes on each one of these here. We'll just give you a couple of minutes on this and have you jot them down just to get you going on this process. So I'll stop talking and let you work for a couple. Okay, next one. 5 things you are currently dissatisfied with in your personal life. By the way, do you know why we ask for the dissatisfactions first? Because if we ask for the good things first, everybody gets all excited. Oh, I like all these. And then when it comes to ask for the dissatisfaction, nobody has any. So this is, again, objective reality.
Support a product. I can try this. I support a product that is not the flagship product of my company. And if you're on the development team that's doing the flagship product, you're well resourced. And so the result of that is that you end up having to learn things and apply yourself to getting them done that you've never done before. More often, I mean, at first it's fun. The fruit is pretty low and easy to do, but as time goes on, it gets harder and harder.
Yeah.
And so it's a double-edged sword, right? I don't like it. However, I'm growing at the same time. But that's, I think, the biggest one that can drive dissatisfaction is, I got to get to these things and that I got to learn because everybody else is strapped, and can't do it. And
Is this in the first section, the professional life?
First section, yeah, professional life.
Well, you might try compartmentalization.
And that's what I do. I have to, help get priority from my leadership and put them into boxes, right? What's got to be the first thing first. But meanwhile, I'm trying to get designs transferred and then go back to those, development things that,
Yeah.
and it's a lot of, leading by example. If I could show you how to do it, I'm good for it one time, but then somebody has to adopt this next
Yeah.
time we go through a design.
All right, so it's number 7. What does success mean to you? And after I'll give you a couple minutes to answer this question. I'll tell you what 100 of the world-renowned psychologists who had a big summit, and their summit was to answer one question. Well, the summit was to answer the question, what is happiness? And I guess you could potentially replace success with happiness, but I'll share that with you, but I don't want to steal anybody's idea while they're working on it. So I'll give you a minute and I'll share it with you.
Sorry, I may be talking too much here, but the word pleasure comes to mind. You have some pleasure. Success to me is the feeling of pleasure.
Well, success, that's a great answer. Success is going to have everyone's going to have a different answer about that.
Like peace of mind. And
Yeah. All right, so here's what the psychologist said. 100, the top psychologists in the world, they said, what was the definition of happiness? And they spent a week hashing this all out. And they came away and they said it was 2 things. Number 1 was gratitude, giving gratitude, being grateful for what you have. And number 2 was progress. Whenever you're growing and whenever you're extending gratitude to people, those were the 2 things they said. I'm not saying they're right, but hey, they were the 100 top psychologists, which I think actually are probably pretty good, because I tell you one thing, I would say what success means to me is growth. I always want to be growing, learning. I always want to be, 1% better than yesterday. So that's what success means to me. All right, what accomplishments are you most proud of any? What accomplishments are you most proud of any, and why? And this might be one, by the way, if anybody is okay with it, after you work on this might be one that someone might want to share. So does anybody have one to throw out? And I'm not putting anybody on the spot. You don't have to, but does anybody have one they might want to throw out?
Maybe my kids,
That's a great one.
because I know that I was key to them becoming successful as they are, and they will ideally outlive me and be my legacy.
And that would have been mine, but on my second line, I would have said, the accomplishment I'm most proud of is, of course, I've been married for 47 years. So my wife and my 2 kids, but the second line would have been that I was successful in persuading my wife to be the disciplinarian. And I'd always tell my daughters, I said, I always tell my wife, I want them to come visit me in the nursing home. So you be the disciplinarian. So my daughters, and then my wife being the disciplinarian. Those are my 2 greatest accomplishments. What beliefs and values would you be willing to die for? Now, this is a critical question here, because at the end of the day, what is something you'd be willing to die for? Obviously, it's a metaphor, right? I mean, we're not going to go jump off a building or anything, but what belief or values are so important to you that you'd be willing to die for it?
Your family.
Hmm.
Protecting your family.
I'll share another little secret with you. I don't know if it's a secret. We work with a lot of Fortune 500 sales teams that were in pharmaceuticals and in financial, and the ones we worked with were turnarounds. I mean, we didn't work with the successful people; they were already successful. We worked with the turnarounds, and we went through this whole we have a whole process we went through and everything. And one of the things that we always got them to do was to come up with this answer: what was the most important thing in their life. And in most cases, in a high number of the cases, it was their family, it was their children, it was their family. And we got them to tie that to their need for sales, for success. And we would get them to actually get a photograph of their children, and their wives, some wives, some not wives, but their children. And they would put that in their little portfolio. And they would see that. And when it came time to the end of the day and they were tired and they didn't want to make any more calls, or they didn't want to write the proposal, or they didn't want to do the research, they'd open up their portfolio and they'd see the picture of their children there. And that was the number one thing that caused people to move forward and to help turn themselves around. Which we've kind of been saying here and everybody's on board with. Describe a perfect day in your life if there were no limits. I would make all my putts. That would be one. Describe a perfect day in your life where there were no limits.
You accomplish everything you set off to do.
That would be a good one. What else?
Win
What's
the
something a little
Powerball.
deep? What's something a little deeper?
Win the Powerball. Not very
Win the
deep.
Powerball.
Not very deep.
That would be a perfect day. You know they done the research, and a lot of these people that won the Powerballs, I mean, they won like millions of dollars, right? And a lot of these people who were middle class thinkers, they just wanted to be comfortable. A lot of those people, I mean, I don't know what all the numbers are, but there was a lot of them that after they'd won the money, some number of years later, they lost it all.
Mhm.
They did bad investments, they spent it, whatever.
Yeah.
All right, a couple more ones here. All right, so this one here is to list the 3 most positive emotional experiences in your life. I guess this would be historical. So what would be the 3 most positive emotional experiences that you've ever had in your life?
I think mine would be along the lines of what Barbara said earlier, the birth of my kids.
Yeah.
Say childbirth, marriage, and maybe the first time I got beat up on a school ground.
Positive?
Well, I don't know if that's positive.
Yeah, because then he became a
Yeah.
karate master.
You're right. I put that one up. I mean, I guess positive in a way it sure made you think differently. You never let anybody do that to you again.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it was a negative emotion. You're right. It doesn't belong there. Sorry.
Oh, I like this one. You're on an airplane that's about to crash. You got 30 seconds to write a note to your infant son or daughter about the 3 most important things you learned in your life. List these 3 things in the next 30 seconds. As you can tell about these here, we're doing this quickly here, but of course you got these in your chat. These really can take some time to really think about. As a child, describe how your parents and other significant family members made you feel about yourself. And this can be a tough one. I mean, some people have had difficult childhoods and difficult parental relationships. Others have had fabulous ones, right? But again, you're trying to really get into your head, into your psyche, so you can deal with some of the baggage that you might be carrying around.
So what these are kind of doing, Mark, the way I see it is you're looking for mental clarity. You're taking yourself to the edges, what you would die for, what are the most of this or the most of that. And that's helping clarifying, where you think you are, what your vision is, correct?
I think that's an astute idea. List the 3 biggest heroes in your life and why you admire them so much. This might be one that people might be willing to share. 3 biggest heroes in your life and why you admire them so much, living or dead. So anybody have any that they would like to share?
I would say it's people that brought around, social change, like Martin Luther or Gandhi,
Yep.
people like that, because that's one of the hardest things to do is change social fabric.
That is absolutely true. I would have said, anybody else have anybody to throw out? People? I think mine were Churchill, Lincoln, and I guess I'd probably say my mother. She suffered with arthritis from when I was 7 years old. I remember when I was 7 years old, she was suffered with her arthritis, and she suffered it through her whole life and just never complained. I couldn't have done that, but she never complained, and she suffered. She was in pain all the time. And in those days, the only medicine was Bufferin. That's all they could take was bufferin. There was no drug. Now they've got all kinds of medicines for arthritis, but in those days, all she could do is take her bufferin every day and live with the pain. All right, so this is another good one here. Write your obituary. So if you could write your obituary, and you'd like it to be what you would hope that you would be in the future, what would that look like? Obviously, we're not going to have enough time to dig into that too much here, but this is another good one. It's 2098 and your great grandchild is about to give a speech about you. What would be the main themes of the speech? Maybe the rule of three always works. So if your great grandchild was going to give a speech, they were going to introduce you, give 3 salient points about you, and then have a close. What would those 3 salient points be? Now, when you do all this, there's another. This page is in your handout. These are the components of vision: business, family, money, finances, recreation, health and diet, etc. What I would suggest that you think about doing is to write a page at a minimum, 1 page, 8.5 by 11, handwritten. It just seems to work better. A handwritten page of at least 1 page of what your thoughts are about your business and your career, about your family and friends. Now, when you get done with all this, we suggest that this probably should be a 10 to 20 page document. So you might end up with a couple pages on each one of these, but there's no right or wrong. But to really take the time to really write out what you think about all these things and what you'd like to see have happen. And then these last are just these slides, I believe, are all just lines that you can fill in. So let me leave you with one last story here, and then we can open it up to Q&A. And that's the following. Many years ago, I went to a program, which you can still go to. It was kind of a self-actualization program. It was put on by a fellow named Dan Sullivan with an organization called the Strategic Coach, which is his organization. His company is in Toronto, Canada, and he also has an office in Chicago. So we go, it's a 3-year program. So we show up on the very first day, and he says, okay, he said, I want you to tell me what year or what age you believe you will pass, or what you will pass away. What year will it be? And surprisingly enough, when you ask that question, and he said this, but I've also experienced it as well, that most people have a number. It could be from genetics from their family. When Uncle Charlie died, when their father or mother died, they have a number. Okay. Now, let's then it says, okay, take that number and just extrapolate it forward some reasonable number of years. So let's say that the number that you picked, that what you thought you would pass, was 75. Just pick that number, hypothetically here. And now you say, okay, I'm going to think about this a little bit, and what might a number be that I would live to? And you come up with 95. So now in the last 5 seconds, you just added 20 years onto your life from what you thought it was going to be. The question is, and the teaching point here, the question is, in those 20 years, what would you do? What would you be? What would you do? How would you spend those last 20 years? Assuming you were healthy and you had your cognitive abilities, what would you do? Would you be a mountain climber, be an author, start a business, go back to school, be a doctor? What would you do in those last 20 years of your life? And the reason why you ask this question is, whatever you say it is that you would do is who you really are. And then the question would be, if who that is not what you're doing today, well, why not? And shouldn't you start a process? You're not going to run off and quit your job today and sell your house and all that other stuff. But if that's what you really want to be, why not start that process? Let's say you were going to write a book. Well, start buying some books on how to write books. Put an outline together. Start being who that person is that you want to be in those extra 20 years. And there was a gentleman here a few minutes ago on the phone. He said in his current role, one of his dissatisfactions was about how he was having to work on projects that maybe he didn't want to work on or whatever. This is a great exercise for you to do, is to sit down, glass of wine, always got to have a glass of wine, and ask yourself, if I had an extra 20 years, what would I do? And maybe that's the catalyst for you to say, you know what? I'm going to start to move towards that other direction now. And it may take me 3 years, may take me 5 years, but I'm going to start that today, and I'm going to move in that direction so that I can enjoy the later parts of my life. There's a couple of other things that just to tag on to the end of that. Once you figure that out, you have to ask yourself some hard questions. One is, do I have enough money to live those last 20 years? So it would behoove you to say, okay, I'm going to hire an accountant, or I'm going to do a deep forensic dive on my financials. Maybe I'm going to get a wealth advisor. I'm going to really figure out where I'm with money so I can be able to last that period of time. It also, and here's a harder one, I think it's a harder one, is who are your friends? Are the friends that you have today going to support you in this? Or are they going to be a bunch of negative Nellies and the negative Neds and tell you you're crazy and you'll never do this and this is a waste of time and you shouldn't do that? Who are going to be your friends? Because the friends that you're going to need out in that extra 20 years may be different friends than you have today. And that doesn't mean you should call up your friends and tell them I'm not going to talk to you anymore. But it says I need to start looking for friends and relationships with people that are going to match up with where I'm going and what I want to do in my life. So those are kind of a couple of hard things that you need to wrestle with in all this, because this isn't easy, right? I mean, it's not an easy thing to do, but it's a great way to kind of think about this whole vision piece. And like I said, in Phil's mind experience in the last few months, all these companies, one of the most important things that they were missing was they did not have a collaborative view of the vision of their business. They had strategies, they had visions, but they really weren't all bought in. And I don't think they'd ever ask the what if question. That was the sense I got from these guys.
Thank you, Mark.
Okay. All right. Do we have any questions that anybody wants to ask?
Well, Mark, I guess I have one if I don't see any others here.
Okay.
How about, how do you know if and when your vision is big enough and bold enough for your company?
How do you know when it is?
Yeah, well, how what is it? What makes it big and bold enough?
Well, let me think about
How
that.
would that impact, if it was bigger and bolder, how would that impact your business or your project?
Well, somebody asked, it's a good question. Someone asked me a question similar to that. They said, based upon all your knowledge of business and strategy, whatever, what is the one, if you could tell an entrepreneur, if you could only tell them one thing, what would be the one thing that you would tell them? And the one thing that I would tell them would be, you will never think big enough. You will never think big enough. And the way I kind of get to that is that you take Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, and Richard Branson, who visions were so big that they couldn't be fulfilled on this planet. They had to go into outer space. So I think that the question you ask is a very good one. It's a hard one because I don't think you ever know for sure. But I'll tell you, I know that many of the companies that we've worked with and we've done this strategy with in the mental toughness thing is they've achieved a 10x level of growth. So you might start there and say, if the market cap or the exit value of my company was 10x, how much is that? And what would that look like? And could we do that? And what would it take to do that? And how would we have to be different, look different, act different, behave different? Maybe be in a different market. In this book I was telling you.
Yeah, can you hold that up again, please? Somebody's looking for the title and the author on that, if you could.
This
Oh,
is
no,
this
no, I think it was the other one. I think it was the tool book. Is that,
Steve Siebold, 177.
Mental Toughness, Secrets of the World Class?
Yeah, it's a great book. It has 177 tools. Each one of these tools, it's described, it's about 300 words. They are not in here in linear form, although objective reality is number one, and it is probably the most important. But all the rest of them are not in here in linear form. So if you have a problem that you need to deal with, you just open up the index, go down the index, and find the tool that you need to use. So let me give you one example. Well, compartmentalization is one of them. So you may figure out, how could I use compartmentalization? But another one is, let's say you have a problem employee and you need to sit down and have the conversation with the problem employee. One of the tools in here is called facilitated introspection. And that gives you, describes it to you, and it gives you a short little outline as to how you should approach the conversation with this employee. So that it's not the whole thing, but it's a beginning piece. So you have like a tool. So you think of it, you got your quiver with all your arrows. You got 177 arrows in your quiver. And when problems come up to your business every day, that you deal with every day, and you're not exactly sure how we should address it, you take out the book and you look for a tool. And it's a way to start thinking about how you would address that tool. So Phil, I don't think I answered your question exactly, but what I'm saying is that you could start with, what would 10x growth look like? That'd be one place to start, but there is no limit. I mean,
Yeah.
Oh, I know what I want to tell you. In this book that I was rereading, called Built to Last, they're talking about Boeing, and Boeing got their chops on building aircraft for the military during the wars. And when they went out, when the wars came to an end, and they weren't making military planes for the military any longer, they needed to go into the commercial market. They knew nothing about the commercial market. They decided they need to jump into the commercial market, which of course they did, and they made a lot of planes, which recently have had some issues, but before I don't think they had as many issues. And so the question would be, in your businesses, is where you're at today in the market segments you're fulfilling the services for them. What are the adjacent markets that you could go find? And a great book to read about that, as you can tell, I read a lot of books. Is a great book to read about that is one called Blue Ocean Strategies. And what Blue Ocean Strategies talks about is there's blue oceans and there's red oceans. Red oceans are where everybody's fighting it out and there's blood in the water. Blue oceans are what they call uncontested spaces, places where you can go where there's not that much competition, and you can go in there and you can own a niche.
Yeah, Blue Ocean's fantastic. Apple basically did Blue Ocean with the iPhone in 2007 because there was all commoditization of the regular cell thing, and they busted it loose and went completely away from everything else and went to Blue Ocean in 2007.
Totally agree. And if you're an Apple fan, a Steve Jobs fan, which I am, his biography that was written by Isaacson, simply called Steve Jobs, I think is his title. It's white covered book. It is an excellent biography to read. Anybody in business should read that biography. Read about all Steve Jobs's thinking and his reality distortion fields. It's an excellent biography to read. It's a great business book to read with you.
Thanks very much for joining us tonight, Mark.